All right, hello and welcome back to the Data Science Castnet podcast, previously known as the Generative Landscape Discussion Series. We're going to be trying to expand the scope of this a little bit, and I figured I might as well keep it going from where we started. So in this first episode slash sixth episode, I'm joined by Wasim Lorgat, who's here to talk about his recent project leveraging Clip, which was how this first got started, but then also more generally his approach and philosophy around tooling and AI and that sort of thing. So Wasim, so good to have you here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and what you're interested in?
It's good to be here, of course. Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Wasim, like you said. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, where we are both now at the moment. Um, yeah. My background, I studied to be an electrical engineer, mechatronics, and then during my master's, I kind of had lots of data and then needed to learn how to work with it. So I got into data science. Then went into like the AI kind of startup space in South Africa. And then more recently have been also getting involved in like fast AI community and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, very cool. It was fun to discover that we had some in the background. We actually both studied almost identical programs at the same university. So when people were like, "Oh, you remind me of this other guy we know from Southern Africa," Wasim, have you met him? Do you know him? I was like, no. But then as soon as we linked up, it was like, actually, we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Excellent. So excited to talk about that. So maybe as we go, well, first of all, what are you working on these days? You mentioned like nbdev and FastAI. Do you want to start? We had Hamel on last time, but we didn't end up talking that much about nbdev. So do you maybe want to start by talking a little bit about that, and then we can branch into some of the other things as well?
Yeah. So nbdev is still, I would say it's quite a difficult thing to explain quite often. Maybe the simplest way is it's like asks the question, or tries to answer the question of like, how would you program using Jupyter notebooks? So like to program anything. So you want to create like a web application, a server, like a library that other people can import. How will you do all of those things inside of Jupyter notebooks? Not just copy pasting into like ordinary Python files. And so nbdev is it's an open source software platform, software development platform for programming in Jupyter notebooks. It's very like exploratory in some ways, but at the same time, quite robust. Like I think Jeremy from FastAI, he's written like all of FastAI software in notebooks. I mean, that's like tens of different libraries across all those things I mentioned, like web servers and the FastAI framework. And nbdev itself is like bootstrapped in notebooks. So so that's what nbdev is. Why I got into it. I've always been like interested in editors and programming environments and languages and things like that. And I kind of eventually realized that notebooks are, I think, like underrated and super powerful, like programming environments. But yeah, nobody was pushing it as far forward as I think like Jeremy is with nbdev. And so, yeah, I started out just playing with FastAI and then realized it's written in notebooks and then had to like figure out how to do that and delved into nbdev and just like I couldn't stop and going deeper.
Great. So, I mean, like to me and many others, I think nbdev is very associated with FastAI. And then with that sort of like experimental, like, oh, I'm trying things out in a notebook. Maybe I'm training a little model and saving it, writing a function that I might use later. But you mentioned building all of these other applications in that as well, web servers and all these kind of like more complex maybe or different interfaces that aren't necessarily just exploratory programming. So I'd like to dive into like how you think about that, and maybe a good way to do that is a case study. So the reason I invited you on was I'd just been teaching about Clip, and then you built this great product called meepo.shop, which we'll link in the description. And what you did, as far as I can understand, is just scrape an entire existing like e-commerce site and build a better search to scratch your own itch. So maybe could you tell us a little bit more about that project, and then I'd love to quiz you about like how the development went and what that looked like on your side.
Yeah, for sure. So, so Superbalist is like one of the leading South African online stores. and like I use it and family members use it, but it's super difficult to search for anything. Like the search is quite strict, and so if you like search for, this is one of the examples, like if you search for fork, you don't find like any forks because they're all labeled as cutlery, so you have to search for cutlery. So that was on the one side of things going on, and I was just annoyed by that. But then on the other side, I'd seen a few other people build these clip search engines. So the most popular one that I know of is Lexica, which is like a search engine over stable diffusion images and prompts. And I saw that like they were doing that over like millions of images on a single server, like super efficiently with clip and face, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought like it seems like a really powerful technology stack, like super simple but can do a lot. And I had this like scratch, this thing that I wanted to deal with, and so I just put this together, and I did it in notebooks as well. And scrape. So I built a scraper for Spurbalist and just indexed those things and made the search engine.
Cool. And I mean, that's something I want to like actually dig into a little bit more from you, because several years ago, if you said build an AI powered search engine for this website, you would have said, well, it'll be a little hard to scrape the website and it'll be nearly impossible to train the AI to do this kind of semantic search. And now it seems almost like for you, the building blocks are there, that the easy part was the AI and the hard part was making it maybe performant and scalable and, run really quickly. So what's been your experience of using, I mean, in this case, Clip, but more generally, like these kinds of AI models and how that fits into your workflow as someone who does this more full stack development?
So it's powerful that they're all free and open source and incredibly strong models that you would never be able to train by yourself, like trained on so much data and all that. The deployment situation I still feel is kind of difficult or tricky. Like the scraping was some of the complexity, but then maybe the deployment is and just like gluing all these things together is a bit more of the complexity. So one difficulty here was like, so often you could use like an inference API or something like Clip.
Yeah.
So I think there's like Hugging Face and Replica, two that I know. You can't do that here because those are typically quite slow to the response time, and you want the search. Each search is an inference, which needs to be fast.
Right.
So it's not that bad though. You just need it means you need a web server that loads the models like into memory once off, and then just repeatedly does inference super fast.
Okay. And like, so for you, you mentioned this deployment is like non-trivial, and there's a lot of, I was talking with someone, well, our mutual friend who's thinking of a course about like deploying these kind of ML apps. And there's a lot that goes into it, because you need to know how to set up a server, how to figure out whether it's going to be fast enough. Is it going to scale? Thinking about, things like latency, right? You can't just rely on an external API that takes a few seconds because you want your search results like that. So how did you go about learning that? Like, how did you get to this point where Meepo, for those who didn't see like the original like announcement and things, we're seeing through this together in what, a week or two of like part-time, playing around, which just shows like you've obviously got these skills that are honed. How did you go about learning that? Like, how did you figure out, I need to set up a web server and choose a service and figure out what that back end looks like?
So a lot of the parts I was fortunate enough that the Lexica creator like spoke about, gave some hints in like these tweets and really deep down threads and things. So I knew that it could be done on a single server. I knew like roughly how much memory and CPU it would need. And I knew that it was, so it's obviously Clip, and then I knew he used the Facebook similarity search index. So I knew like which pieces I was going to use. It's the first time that I've like deployed something on a kind of just a VPS like that, like on my own outside of like an organization or anything where they usually have like a lot of cloud stuff set up. And that stuff, I mean, So you just Google along the way, and then like you kind of struggle through it. It's like, how do I set up a VPS? And then you do that. And it's like, how do I, so like which Python frameworks, web frameworks are good. I asked that on Twitter also, like you get feedback there. It's just a slow process of like asking and slowly plodding along it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to me that you've done this, because it shows a path of like, I mean, it's not even running on a GPU, right? It's just CPU inference. So, we're doing these, I mean, we're talking about courses and generative models and all these powerful pre-trained things. And it's one thing to like have that work, in a Gradio demo that someone set up for you, or in a notebook even. But it's really cool that, yeah, it is possible to glue together these pieces. There's libraries for, semantic image search. There's libraries for serving up some sort of API or backend. There's libraries for like developing things. But what you've done is really nice, because you've pulled it all together. You've made it into an elegant product. You've identified a thing. And so this is exactly the kind of project that I'm hoping, people realize that they can build.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fun to consider how you would do this. Cool. And I mean, we are actually, one of the reasons we're here together in person is thinking about something similar on those same lines. And you'll see that hopefully on this channel, trying to document that process as well, of like, how do you package these machine learning ideas into something? Excellent. Okay, so that's meepo. Really great to hear about that. I would like to go back to, you mentioned that you've always been interested in editors and thinking about like notebooks and tooling. And you've also just mentioned on Twitter that you're thinking of building your own like Jupyter front end. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about your frustration with like the traditional editing workflow, and what you're thinking about in terms of like how that might be even better than, say, nbdev in Jupyter Lab today.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so the editor that I use before notebooks is, I ended up just using them with like plugins, particularly a language server plugin. So the language server is like the thing that powers VS Code and a lot of editors these days. It gives it like intelligent, like auto completion and jump to definition, like all those things they've abstracted away into the separate thing. So so I can get all that in Vim. And why do I use Vim? Because it's just super, super fast. And it can get me all the features that I need. But like for me, one of the main things is just really fast, and it's just light. I haven't had that feeling with any other editor. Maybe I had like to upgrade my laptop or something, but there's always a bit of kind of sluggishness to these things, and it kind of makes sense because a lot of them are designed, like they've been built long ago, or they need to support like all the languages or whatever the case is. Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so that's one part of things actually, and then the other part is just in terms of like, even if it's a super fast editor like Vim or whatever, and it has all the features you wanted, like editing, people say like dead code, I guess, has its shortcomings. And so if you watch a lot of like programmers today, the way that they actually do things is they'll have like an IPython session open, or they'll have console in a browser or a notebook even, and they're like constantly running code. And then when they're ready, when it's done, they like iterate really quickly where they can run things live, and then they copy paste it back into their big Python file or whatever. That feels like it's not what we're going to be doing in the future. I think like that context switching and the copy pasting is not, it can be better. It just feels like it can be better. And so that's where like notebooks are really kind of have leveled things up, I think. There are also other languages where this is more common. So like in Clojure, they call it like REPL driven development. So REPL for redevelop, evaluate, print, loop. So that in that way, it's like your editor's often like connected to a live Clojure environment, and it's constantly like giving feedback back and forth. Lisp has also had this sort of thing, so I think it's always been there, and I think it would be cool for that to enter the mainstream. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that thinking.
Yeah,
People follow this space to see you end up building? You said you're working on like a Mac editor starting point. So something just trying to combine those two, something really snappy and fast that's also notebook driven.
So the thing there for the custom like front end. Okay, so with nbdev, like I think I learned a lot about. So for me personally, I learned a lot about like the Jupyter file format and some things about the editor and the limitations and so on. But I think so. Ultimately, I think that Jupyter editors weren't designed assuming that you would do all of your software development in notebooks. Which again, nbdev, that's the goal of nbdev. And my long-term, like ambitious goal here is like, what if you did all the Jupyter front end or like any notebook environment that's designed to like be your main programming environment, like you do all your library, like everything there, not just for like analyses and training models. So the first bit I think is just I've never done Mac development, so get like a basic notebook editor that's almost exactly like the basic functionality from Jupyter Notebook, I think. And we'll see how that goes, how hard, maybe that's like impossible, but we'll see how that goes. And depending on that, then try to think about like, how do you make this like just do everything in there? How do you just make it your main environment?
Cool. All right. Thanks for seeing. Yeah. So like I said, exciting stuff. Looking forward to seeing where this goes. A final question then. So if someone's listening to this and they're saying, oh, this sounds interesting, like I'd love to explore this kind of notebook-driven development. Maybe I need to give nbdev a chance, or maybe I want to try and build something like the kinds of things you've been doing. What would be your advice for them if they're just setting out? Like what do they start Googling, or what's their like first project or point of call if they're wanting to pursue this direction or explore it a little bit?
I think like try nbdev out. Check out the nbdev website, like the tutorial I think is quite good to get started. And you can follow me and what I'm doing as well on Twitter. So it's at Wasim Lorgat. We can put that in the description. But so I'll be sharing a bit more about like these custom front ends and stuff, which I don't think there's too much out there on. There are two really cool projects as well. If you want to build a custom front end, check out nbterm and I think it's jpterm, both by the same person, and they're both terminal Jupyter front end, so like in your terminal, and they're very like well designed, so like reference implementations. But I mean, ultimately, I think just to use notebooks more. Try nbdev, try Quarto, which is also a publishing.
Yeah, that's what you use for your blog and things, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I should definitely mention, like, yeah, when you're thinking about this, go check out Wasim's blog. He has a great post on notebook best practices, and then also just a lot of other posts. So a good way, I think, to keep up with what's going on. And yeah, I guess would you say that like that kind of working in public as well is a good way to like be documenting what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I love it. Like I love seeing people do all these cool things on Twitter and on their blogs, wherever they want to do it. Definitely work in public, share your stuff, share it with us, send us DMs, like more people should be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I've reached out to and said, hey, how would you do this or that? And I know if you're seeing someone building in public like this, yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Actually reach out and say, hey, I'm also building this thing. Do you have tips? And, do you want to collaborate? Probably not, but start building up those relationships and getting that feedback, because yeah, it's one thing to like build something. You could have sat on Meepo for a year trying to make it all perfect, but instead put it together in a couple of weeks, just putting together these resources, put it out there. Straight away you're getting input from people, and people get to actually try it out. So that's really great.
Yeah,
awesome. Okay, thank you very much, Wasim. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with before we close?
Let's think about that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said. So yeah, work in public, share your things. Don't try to get it too perfect. Share it way before you think it's ready. Just share always. Like, it's good advice.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. We will see you for the next episode of the Data Science Podcast. Let me know if there's any guests you'd like to see or questions you'd like to see addressed. Otherwise, just for now.